Let's hit on the latest developments from over the weekend. The first of this week, Tennessee versus the NCAA. We do know a court date has been scheduled, and it's been a lot of he said, she said, a lot of responses from one side to the other. Not a whole lot of anything different since Friday or Thursday of last week, but a lot of talking.
Yeah, it's going to boil down to what does the judge see with the temporary restraining order, and you would think that you're going to get that decision coming up today on this Tuesday. And then of course if everything goes Tennessee's way, the state of Tennessee's way, you'll see everybody convened in Greenville, lawyers only, no fans. At least that's what everybody's pushing. Next Tuesday, but it's what you'd expect, right, Grant? I mean, it's this is why we need the TRO. The NCAA says wild, wild west, word salad. And honestly, just changed a few words from kind of their pitch to the TRO on the two-time transfer that they lost back, 45, 50 days ago in West Virginia. And then, of course, Tennessee countered again with, the NCAA is governing a world that does not exist.
Yeah, and I really don't know what to make of the kind of the step-by-step developments of this thing or how it's going to play out. But I do think if you're Danny White, you're too smart, you're too good at your job to put out the statements they've put out and put out the venom they've basically put out against the NCAA as strongly as they've worded all their statements and all their responses, to not feel good about their case or what they have to prove, or feeling like the NCAA can't or will not be able to prove whatever they're trying to prove and regulate what was an unregulated world at the time where they're trying to go back and enforce these rules. It feels like in hindsight. So, I mean, I don't know kind of what's going to happen here step by step or how long the process is going to take out. I also didn't expect the NCAA to be working on a Saturday and putting out a statement, but I guess they had a deadline to meet. So maybe it's going to be a little bit more expedited than I thought. But surely Tennessee thinks the way they've handled this thing publicly and the statements they've put out, they've got a pretty good case, and they feel pretty good about where they stand as this thing kind of plays out in the step-by-step process here.
Well, Rob, I don't think they do that. To Grant's point, I don't think they do that unless they feel good about everything they have. And Tennessee has seen the draft of the notice of allegations. Again, all schools kind of get that ahead of time. Sometimes it does not come. Tennessee's yet to receive that notice of allegations as of this Tuesday morning. So, does it come? We'll see. I think a lot of it depends on kind of how this thing plays out over the next 7 to 10 to 14 days.
Yeah, AP, that's the thing I can come back to more and more is not, whatever the facts of the case may be or what are the allegations, but it's that two people that are, as respected in their industry, as have the reputation that Dondi and Danny White have. I just, not for a second do I think all this strong language is bluster. I think they generally, like you say, I mean, I think they feel very confident that, they were on the right side of this thing, or at least, have an argument that is certainly going to hold up in court, and just base that on everything we've seen from Donde Plowman and Danny in how they've guided this, athlete department through some really tricky times over the last 3 years and look at where it is now, and not just in football, but, all over the board. And just, when those two are coming out swinging like that, I just, like everybody else, have a very hard time believing that they don't feel like that they stand on pretty firm ground.
Not to get too far down deep into the weeds here, but a couple of highlights from the responses from over the weekend. In the plaintiff's response to the NCAA, one of the big selling points essentially was, and I'm just taking a quote from the story from that response. The NCAA cannot benefit from the fact that its rules, scattered across 437-page manual, are often impenetrable, shifting, and vague. On the other side, the day before, the NCAA was reminding the plaintiffs, like, hey, I don't care what you say, that there's been an SEC representative on our Division I council, and these member institutions have agreed to follow these rules. So that was kind of one of the big highlights over the weekend in both those responses, Austin, saying, your rules are vague, but the NCAA is saying, well, you agreed to follow them. And, that's something that they'll obviously discuss in court.
Well, the biggest issue here is the fact that, so much of the NIL rules are, were either not in place in the time frame that they are investigating and have since changed, right? And again, which goes back to Grant's point a minute ago, they're trying to retroactively go back and change the speed limit and give out tickets. Like, it's one of those deals where, like, I think the longer this, plays out, I think you're going to see Tennessee is in a really good spot here because I think that, they know exactly what they have from an evidence standpoint. I think they feel really good about it. And if you go back to Donnie's original statement, what did she say? None of our coaches or student athletes broke any rules. And then she went as far as to back up Spire. And so, I think that, again, I think this comes back down to the gray areas that the NCAA let become bigger gray areas. A few years ago when, name, image, and likeness was passed by the Supreme Court. And, they kind of let this spiral and unravel themselves. And now they're trying to kind of put it back together. Well, Humpty Dumpty, when he breaks, he didn't, no putting it back together again. So, I mean, it is what it is. But at the same time, I think if you're Tennessee, you feel really good about, kind of where things stand. Again, it's not a lock, slam, dunk, but I think you feel really good about kind of where you're at with this process.
You mentioned the in terms of the Humpty Dumpty analogy. I mean, it's the analogy we've heard a lot the last 2 years. It's, toothpaste is out of the bottle. You can't literally put it back in. And that's kind of where you're at right now. That's what the NCAA is trying to do. Going back to something you said a moment ago, Austin, in terms of the notice of allegations, at the time of this recording, again, it has not come out. Do you think that they could slow play this notice of allegations to literally wait until after the court date on February 13th, depending on how that goes, if Tennessee receives a notice of allegations? Or do you think it's more likely Tennessee will receive those before the court date?
Yeah, I think that it behooves the NCAA to kind of push it back, right? Because I think when you think about it, and maybe it comes later today, who knows? But I think it behooves them to push it back because at the end of the day, the state of Tennessee and the state of Virginia took legal action against the NCAA to kind of head things off at the pass, much like the NCAA leaked the story to Pat Forty to what? Get out ahead of it and head it off at the pass because they knew Tennessee was going to push back. And so they wanted to try to, kind of drag Tennessee down in the mud from a perception standpoint. It didn't really work. I mean, outside of the initial hour, once Dondi came out firing, I mean, who's really been on the side of the NCAA in this deal? Not many national media people have been going, oh man, Tennessee's guilty. I mean, most people are like, this is crap. Most opposing fan bases say, well, this is crap. If this was Alabama or Georgia, I would tell you it's crap. I think at the end of the day, you have too much going on behind the scenes, coaches negotiating deals, collectives announcing kids with deals as soon as the kid commits. We're all to think that the kid just went there not knowing what he was going to get, and there was no discussion ahead of time. So with this notice of allegations, I do think it behooves them to wait because they can always go, yeah, we were investigating, but we didn't really find anything. They decided to sue us. We weren't really going to go down that road, and they can kind of try to walk it back a little bit. So I do think it behooves them to wait and kind of see how this plays out in federal court in Greenville.
You got the collective up at Ohio State that you're referencing, Caleb Downs transferring, to Ohio State, and simultaneously when he's announced, the collective is announcing the signing of Caleb Downs. You got Caden Proctor, who is being interviewed by a local television station at an Iowa basketball game a couple weeks ago after he committed to Iowa from the transfer portal. And he flat out said, hey, they never stopped talking to me. They never stopped recruiting me. So it very much is the wild, wild west. But in the short term, Rob, as we kind of move on from this, from the day-to-day operations for Tennessee football and recruiting and all that, I mean, nothing's really changed. They've kind of been navigating these waters for the last couple of years and essentially reassuring current players, prospective student athletes, hey, we're open for business and we're going to, we are going to act as if nothing's going to come of this because they don't believe anything will come of this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just, and maybe I'm being naive and a simpleton, it just doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal, like it's some ominous, nebulous cloud hanging over the program, like it felt, 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it just doesn't feel like that at all. I mean, it just feels like a blip, and also, there's no outrage from other fan bases about this. I mean, I think it might be too strong to say everybody wants Tennessee to get a win on this, but I think the majority of college football fans would just like some clarity. Would just like to know where the line is, and I think NIL for the most part, people have accepted it. It's part of the landscape, and let's deal with it. I mean, seems frivolous to me.
I think if you're a fan of another program in general, you better be pulling for Tennessee, because if this thing goes against Tennessee and ends poorly, what's to say they're not going to go after whichever school's next on the line? I mean, Tennessee. It's
Yeah.
not like Tennessee's out here on a limb by themselves, operating and however they're being accused of operating. I mean, this is something where if one's guilty, there's probably a lot of people guilty,
Yeah,
right?
Just like Danny referenced. Yeah.
Grant brings up I said Granny.
I am kind of old.
Grant brings up a great point. To Rob's point, 3 years ago, Tennessee was on the limb on their own, and they're not now. And that's why this whole thing is different, as Rob referenced.
Yeah, you've already been down to Florida State. You're currently checking into Florida. You're currently checking into Miami. Heard rumors of some other Southeastern Conference schools that they'd be knocking on the door to next, or at least we become, public knowledge that they're already kind of poking around there. So Tennessee is certainly not on a ledge by itself to you guys and what you're saying.
And we'll let you know, Eric, when you can get those power duo, the Grant Danny t-shirts, the Granny t-shirts. You can buy those.
We'll sell those along with our Volquest hoodies that everybody wants, and we'll make a fortune here.